you have to make a design choice somehow, and it has to be presented in some way. And I think it's being deliberate as the design team to be sure that you're not unduly pushing people toward what it is that you want to do. Right now, we're at a moment where we could instead think about what does it mean to build for value and experience that somebody might enjoy in a meaningful way.
Hey Maritza, good to see you.
Hey, JJ, it's good to see you too.
Hey, thanks for joining. Hey, I want to talk to you about dark patterns. I know you're all pretty deep there. It caught my eye in the latest federal privacy bill. They talked about deceptive practices, and I wanted to unpack with you firstly kind of what it means in the context of privacy, and what it means just more broadly. Harry Brignall was the person who coined the term, right? Deceptive patterns. And I love how he describes it on his website. And it's just tricks that make you do things you didn't mean to do, like buying or signing something. How would you define it?
So when I'm, working with the product team and we're talking about what's a dark pattern and how do we be sure we're avoiding them and not using them, I would say they're sometimes masqueraded as clever ideas. It's ideas that feel clever to get what the product team wants. And then to me, a thing that distinguishes like a deceptive design from what could be a best practice is it aligned with what the person using it wants to do? So is this, are we doing this up, are we using this certain technique or approach because it benefits the company, or are we doing it because it benefits the user? And I think that's the line for me, like for whose sake are we using it? And what are we trying to optimize?
Gotcha. Well, that's a good lens to think about this as we kind of roll through. Well, let's start at kind of the core of this, which is deceptive or dark patterns in the context of privacy, your data privacy online. And it started, I think, when you're presented with privacy choices, a brand or a publisher saying, "Hey, can we use your data for this or that?" And usually, in Europe, it's an opt-in. You have to say yes or no. In the US, it's here's what we're doing with your data, but here's your button to opt out. And so, in that context, what are some of the things that would be regarded as a dark pattern? Like Fortnite, for example, was in trouble. Like some of the marquee cases here are Fortnite, TikTok. It's comes down firstly at a simple level to button configuration. The button to opt in is hard to find,
Hmm.
and the other one is easy.
Yeah. Ooh, while you were talking, I was thinking about, I'm trying to remember, like, what is like the first design pattern that's been used in the privacy space? And the one that comes to mind is like way back in the day, it used to be the case that websites would hide the link to their privacy policy, or you might see it in email. So for a while, companies would hide the unsubscribe button. So both a privacy policy and a way to unsubscribe. These are things that it's legally required that you have them in certain places. So then, okay, like I said, these things come in by way of a clever design sometimes. Somebody on the product team was probably like, hey, oh, okay, so like we're required to have this thing. What if, what if we make it small and we don't stylize it like a hyperlink? Like, what if it's small, light gray, and isn't underlined so people don't know it's clickable? That, like, if we do that, nobody will click on this thing. So to me, like, that's classic dark pattern.
Right. And this is the line you're talking about, right? Where it's like, is it obviously manipulative here, or are you just trying to get people to not do the thing they want? You're not making the options available to them. When you click through on deceptive patterns on the deceptive design website, there's a whole ton of cool stuff. Trick wording, sneaking, obstruction. Like there's just so many ways to get caught up in this. One of my favorites is nagging.
Hmm.
Experience this all the time. I'm trying to do something. Are you trying to do whatever you're trying to do? Read the New York Times or whatever. And you just pop ups to do stuff, man. It's just too much. Like, hey, you want to sign up for our newsletter? Hey, you want to do this other thing? And it's just to get to the content behind it just seems to be this. You seem to have to like rush through a wall of like 4 or 5 different other prompts.
Yeah. The one that gets me, like, I can be a very literal person, and I, there are a lot of things that I see in user interfaces that just make me want to scream. They just irk me so much. But one of them is increasingly you'll see this when you're asked to agree to a privacy policy. Right above that big shiny button that says I agree, smash this as hard as you can. It's like by clicking I agree, I like I'm saying that I read and understand this whole notice. Like every time I see that, I'm just like, screw you. Like we all know that that's like the biggest lie. And like this isn't a talk about privacy policies, but like just the amount of time it would take to read through all those words. Like to me, like that's dark pattern. Like there's so many that are wrapped up in there. It's like the wording around it. It's like that statement of like I read and fully understand and have no questions and wholeheartedly agree with everything you're saying right now. And just like the design of I agree is huge. And maybe there isn't even a button that says like I don't agree. What are my other options? You don't really have any other options. They don't need to provide that. But like that whole thing is just one big, and it's not deceptive. So like I am wanting to offer deceptive design as an alternative to saying dark pattern, but I feel like it's just like a user experience moment that makes me go bleh.
It's funny. I'm connecting it to what you said earlier. There's some kind of legal checkbox. We all know there's some kind of legal checkbox, and it's sometimes you can approach it as, okay, well, you want me to have this little button, so I'm going to put it on there, but I'm going to make it really hard to find. Or I need to have all these legal terms, so I'm just going to do all of them, all 300 pages, and I'm going to have a little text that says, you agree with this, right? And no one in their right mind is going to actually read that. And if you did, I think, so the German regulator had a really interesting YouTube that we can kind of post to later, but he had a little YouTube clip where they took an average phone and all the apps on it, and they actually said if we sat down and read every privacy policy for each one of these apps, how long would it take? It was over a day of reading, and that's not even of understanding. Like, is that considered a dark pattern as well? I mean, it's so squishy, this area. I mean, it just feels wrong. So maybe that's a good guide for it.
In the work that I do, a lot of the user experience questions I end up puzzling over and really thinking on a lot, it tends to be about consent. And the model of consent that I like to use, as you just said, it can be very tricky to draw a line between what's a dark pattern and what is exemplary user experience or even just good user experience. And so one thing that I like to go to help me decide like where could we aim as opposed to just saying don't use these techniques is I think about a consent model that I think was first popularized by somebody in the space of talking about reproductive health and relationships. It's like consent in relationships. And it's called the Fry's consent model. So this is from Planned Parenthood. So it's the largest provider of sex education in the US. And the Fry's framework for arriving at consent is it freely given? All parties have the freedom to say yes or no. There's no present pressure, force, or manipulation. Is it reversible? So can you change your mind at any time in the agreement? Informed. All parties need to know exactly what they're consenting to every single time. Engaged. Are all parties engaged in what's happening and not rushed to make a decision? Specific. Each agreement requires consent each time, even if it's been done before. And to me, like when I instead of asking myself like, is this a dark pattern? I like to use a different rubric. So like if we're looking at that as the rubric of like, this is what a respectful, meaningful consent moment could look like. Keep those in mind sometime and then like look over the sorts of consent experiences you have in technology. It's laughable. Like freely given. So like I'm thinking about, like when you're asked, do you agree after reading a 300-page privacy policy? There is nobody who's like freely and enthusiastically saying like, yes, yes, I'm so excited about what we're about to do. Like,
Even if
what's
you did,
that?
even if you said, you know what, actually, I do agree, but I just have an issue with clause 54.1. Is there somebody I can talk to about that? And if once I redline that, we'll come back and we're all good. Is there a mechanism to do that?
Right. No,
So let's
not
talk
today. There
about,
could be.
yeah, we just have our own team of lawyers reviewing privacy agreements as consumers. So if we move like open the aperture a little bit to choices that are about more than privacy and just choice architecture in general. I do somewhat of a dark pattern on my kids as well. So like what I do, Maritza, is I say, hey, where do you want to go hiking? This place or that place?
Hmm. Oh yeah.
Actually, I don't want to go hiking at all. I noticed that there wasn't a choice. You
Uh-huh.
know, am I totally dark patterning these guys?
It's hard to say. I feel like with my kids that worked really well, like in the like 2 to 4 range, and now that they're a little older, they call me on it. So I feel like I'm not getting away with it anymore.
No, we just got to get more sophisticated. So, like when you look at all the FTC cases around
Yeah.
dark patterns, actually some pretty good ideas there on how to do this.
Yeah. And actually, so joking aside, I would say, choice architecture and nudges, they, I think, really entered into like mainstream during the Obama administration when I can't remember the name of it, but like Obama had designated a special little task force to do choice architecture and nudges within the US government. And there are a lot of positive examples that you could find of people being, you know, nudged into making choices that are more pro social or even ones that might actually, I was about to say, might more accurately represent their view. But even in saying that, you can't get away from there being a paternalistic nature to knowing and deliberately providing the environment where people are making decisions. And I'm just remembering one of my good friends likes to joke, let's not forget the Rush song. If you're not making a choice, you've still made a choice. So at the end of the day, we've got to make a design choice somehow, and it has to be presented in some way. And I think it's being deliberate as the design team to be sure that you're not unduly pushing people toward what it is that you want to do. So just going back to the hiking example, clearly dad wants to go hiking and the family's going to go hiking. Actually, that makes me wonder. I wonder if Bluey has an episode on consent.
Bluey needs to address this for sure.
That's what I need. I need the Bluey family to tell me what to do here. 'Cause I feel like it'd be like a good age appropriate thing.
People sometimes don't know what they want, and maybe like dark patterns are a way for them to help get there. No, I'm kidding, obviously, but like when you look at things, so when I think about choice architecture, and you mentioned Obama, I mean, all the way back to Chomsky, right? He talks about manufacturing consent, presenting two options and not the third kind of thing.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Maritza, is how do you balance just good product design with, and kind of not running afoul of some of this stuff?
It's a really great question. And the way that I recommend going about this, and this is something that I've done when I'm working on a product team and working with a product team, I think it starts with being honest about, or just being direct about what the goals are when you're designing the interface and what you're measuring. So I've certainly been on teams where the goal is we want to get as many people through this flow, as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, and that's it. But then sometimes, I mean, I've also been on a product team where what we're doing is getting people to like the flow that we're designing is you're signing up for an account. So I like to keep the context of what is it that we're doing. We're designing a flow so that people can create an account and then asking a lot of why questions to figure out like what else is there. So why are people creating an account? Why do we want them to create an account? Well, we want them to create an account so that they have a consistent account that they're using where we can, collect and store data that's relevant to their experience and give them a consistent experience that they can go back to time and time again. Maybe they're storing their photos, their files, their emails. There are lots of good reasons why people would want to have an account with your service. So if what you want is for somebody to have an account that they're going to continue using, that they will agree that they're building, value into, then it's probably not the best choice to use dark patterns to minimize the amount of time people spend setting up an account and also simply maximize the number of people who go through. So I feel like there's this question here in this example of like, well, what does it mean to create an account that you care about? And how do we be sure you can go back to and agree as a user that you care about that account and you want to keep using it? So to me, like the way that you handle this is always contextual. It's being deliberate about design, and it's really being clear about who is the customer, who's the user, what are their goals, who's the company, what are their goals, and how do we come to a point of mutual respect so that we're being supportive of each other's goals and not being manipulative. And I feel like so far in a lot of I'm probably I don't know. I was about to say, maybe in the minority of people who use technology in this way, because I've worked on the product teams, I feel like I look at certain designs and I'm like, I could imagine how this quarterly plan went down. It was like, we need people to do this. We will design this in such a way so that people definitely do this. And we're going to call it a day. Somebody will get promoted and we're going to move on. I'm just like, what about me? What do I do in this situation? And a lot of the times my choices are, do I take it or do I leave it?
So if you're a hardworking product manager and you're trying to balance, like, what's your advice? You're trying to balance, like, well, okay, we need to hit all these goals for engagement and adoption, all this kind of stuff. And how do you balance that request from that might be coming from the company with it doesn't feel right because maybe we've fine.
I feel like that's like the conversation of the moment. Like with ethical tech project and thinking about how do we build for human flourishing, I feel like that's exactly the question. And thinking about like Center for Human Technology, like we've seen a lot of examples of what happens when people are building technology for the sake of technology and for the sake of getting the metrics up. And I feel like right now we're at a moment where we could instead think about like, what does it mean to build for value and experience that somebody might enjoy in a meaningful way? And like, does that measure and show up on like a chart? We'd have to think hard about the right metrics. I feel like kind of naively pursuing metrics for the sake of the metrics. I've not seen many projects that succeed just off of that. I mean, short term, sure. Short term, the numbers look great, but long term, I don't like it. I mean, it's not a winning strategy. It's more than just I don't like it. It's not the winning strategy.
I mean, well, I'm with you. It feels a little squishy. I'm wondering if there are some good guiding lights here. Like, hopefully, this isn't. It feels like this might be an oversimplification, but you tell me. But if the guiding light is transparency and choice for people and their data, like, I know that's not the whole story, but that feels like that's a good start. Are you being transparent about what you're doing with data? Are you giving people meaningful choice? To your point, that they can come back and find, and that choice is balanced and it's complete and sure, balanced with user experience and all that kind of stuff, but easy to find later.
Actually, your question reminds me of like sometimes I've been in conversations where the product team that I'm working with, the concern is I'm like thinking specifically, it's like, well, Maritza, if we do it your way, we'll scare people and they won't want to do it and everybody will say no. And I feel like they like give that to me like a challenge, like, fine, you make this work. Like, if what we're building, when described plainly, is unappealing to users, you should think really hard about that. Like, that's like it just blows my like at the time it literally blew my mind that that would be that somebody thought that that would be a compelling argument.
I got you. You know what, Maritza? And I was writing about this the other day. I was reading somewhere there was a Mozilla Foundation research report on relationship chatbots. You and I have talked before about the different types of data out there and how there's a different threshold for people based on how sensitive that data is when they start to care about their data privacy rights. So this one really got me because the AI chatbots that people are having a relationship with, right? And so you can imagine that folks are incredibly vulnerable in those moments. And then you find out through this report that 9 out of 10 of those are selling your data or they're quiet about whether they're selling it or not. And then you see the kind of prompts like, hey, send me a photo, like, hey, you haven't talked to me in a while, just this like rush to collect data. And going back to what you just said, if your business model is to do that, not to help people, but to actually sell data and have a whole other thing behind it, maybe you should ask yourself some real questions if you believe that transparency and choice in that system won't get you what you need. Right? Am I thinking about it wrong? Like it feels like I don't know. Sometimes it feels like we're a little naive.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, like as you're talking I'm like, okay, so it's usually easier to give advice to people who want to and are motivated to do better and want, when we talk about like the ethical tech project is for human flourishing, like it's easy to talk with the audience. It's like, yes, we're builders and we want that. We want human flourishing. But sometimes you have conversations and you're like, I like money. Like what I want is a company that makes a lot of money and human flourishing, like, but money, like, yes, I really want money. thought I turned off on my phone those automatic emojis. We'll have to talk about that later. Um, at least that one was accurate. But but right, I mean, like being clear about how product teams can avoid dark patterns and deceptive design unfortunately doesn't mean that as a user of technology, we will stop seeing dark patterns.
Yeah, so that was my next question. What do we do what do we do as consumers here, as folks that are engaging with? I mean, Maritza, I heard from a little birdie that you've got a pretty big folder of screenshots of deceptive practices. Just curious,
I
like
do. Yes.
gigabytes, how many screenshots do you have in there?
Oh, now you're setting me up because I had already looked recently. More than 600.
So what do you do? Okay, then, so what do you do? What do you do as a consumer who's just like inundated with this stuff? I mean, a good example is like closing an account versus opening one
Yeah.
on Facebook, Amazon. There's been some conversations around this. I think some legal action too. Like it's just so easy to open an account, so difficult to close it. Like for me, the imbalance when it's so easy to sign up with a couple clicks, but then I got to call somebody to unsubscribe. I don't want to call somebody, man.
No, no. Our generation, like that's our kryptonite, right? Call, talk to some like that could take minutes. Who knows?
Yeah, and you know it's not right. You know it's going to be a whole thing.
Oh yes.
It's going to be a half
Why? Can we get you to
duration.
stay?
Exactly. So what do
Yeah.
we do? What do we do about it as consumers?
Okay. So I do sincerely hope that you do more than I do with my screenshots. But I have to keep the screenshots. I do the screenshots so that I can remember. And for situations like this, I could be like, that's right. There have been many. At a low level, these are like the small acts. One, some days I find myself maybe once a day actually writing in on like a contact us form, just letting them know like while I was using your service, I saw this dialogue. For example, one that gets me every time is when the dialogue says, "Hey, give me a cookie. I've designed a new feature. Check it out." And it's like, check it out now or maybe later. And every time I see that maybe later option instead of no or no thank you, I mean, I'd be happy with a no thanks. But when it says maybe later and I know my response is really never, that makes me rage a little bit. So I take it, that's a screenshot. And sometimes I'll write into a product feedback form and just say, like, this feels gross as somebody, especially when I'm paying for the product. Like when I have a subscription and I see that, I'm like, I like your product and I want to give you my money, but this makes me feel gross. Please stop it. But I really do write stuff like that. And then also, go ahead.
Are you getting replies?
So I actually wrote one recently to my favorite text editor, and that one was a very kind one because I do love this text editor and have since before I was a grad student. And that one I wrote kindly. I was just like, I saw this dialogue. I want to understand more. Will you please tell me about it? And I got a reply to that one, and actually a very thorough reply. It ended up that because of limitations, because of the way that iOS is designed, the developers don't have access to the information that could make for a better user experience. So that I was like, you know what? Yeah, like thank you for responding. Thanks for being clear. It happens. A lot of the time I don't get a response on these things because I'm not sure that they go to the people who really want to see it. But as somebody on a product team, I have seen it before where your VP comes in and is like, "Hey, my friend was using this weekend and they sent me this. Explain it." And that really gets the team fired up. Like, "Oh yeah, like what have we been doing here? Like, yeah, maybe we should fix that. Like, well, what would you want to see?" So I do think there's value in saying something. On another front, so I'm thinking a lot about TurboTax because it's just tax season. TurboTax has a number of examples where they're using dark patterns to get people to either sign up for things that they shouldn't be signing, that they don't need to sign up for, or pay for something that you, as an American citizen, as a taxpayer, don't really need to pay for. So our small act of resistance at our house is we print out our taxes, we file them out by hand, and we mail them in because we're just completely opting out of like we're not going to give you our money and we're not going to give you like I'm not going to use your software. Increasingly, the FTC is interested in these instances. So, you know, filing a complaint with the FTC that something feels to you as a consumer unfair or deceptive is worth doing. And also contacting your state attorney general's office. So they're there to, take care of residents of the state. And a lot of the experiences that you're seeing would be of interest to them.
This is the thing that does it, right? That just consumer awareness, and this is kind of why we do this. Get people more aware. I know it's early days, right? But it's happening. Well, Maritza,
Yeah.
thanks. I really appreciate this.